At my sister's outrageously extravagant wedding, she seated me at the kids' table. She had no idea that humiliating me would be the very thing that utterly destroyed her perfect day. My sister, Clara, always had a flair for the dramatic. Our entire childhood was a stage for her, and she was always the star. I was the stagehand, the audience, the forgotten understudy. So, when she announced she was getting married, I knew it wouldn't be a simple affair. It would be a production, and I was right. The theme was ivory and gold, and honestly, it looked less like a wedding and more like a hostile takeover of a palace. Everything dripped with excess, from the 7-foot-tall cake to the string quartet playing pop songs. I tried my best to be happy for her. I really did. I bought a new dress, spent more than I could afford on a gift, and practiced my beaming sister smile in the mirror for a week straight. Our relationship has always been strained. Our parents worship the ground Clara walks on. She's the successful one, the one with the high-powered fiancé, the one who never makes waves. I'm the artistic one, which in my family's language is code for unemployed and disappointing. So, I knew my place at this wedding was to be seen and not heard. Smile, clap, and don't spill anything on the ridiculously expensive tablecloths. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll admit. But it was during the transition to the reception that the first crack in my composure appeared. Guests were finding their names on an enormous gold-leafed seating chart. I scanned the list. Once, twice, a third time, my finger tracing every name under the letter A. Nothing. My heart started to thud a nervous rhythm against my ribs. Panicked, I found my mother, who was busy adjusting the bow on a tiny cousin's dress. "Mom, I can't find my name on the chart," I whispered, trying not to sound as panicked as I felt. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just fussed with the ribbon, her lips pursed. "Oh, honey." Clara handled the seating. "You should just ask her. She has a special spot for you, a special spot." The words felt like a stone in my gut. I navigated the sea of champagne flutes and designer suits until I found Clara holding court by the towering cake. She looked like a queen, radiant and untouchable. "Clara," I said, my voice barely audible over the music, "I can't find my seat." She finally turned to me, a perfect polished smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Alex, don't be silly. Of course you have a seat." She gestured vaguely towards a dim corner of the grand ballroom, near the kitchens. "We put you over there. We just thought you'd be more comfortable." I followed her gesture, my eyes straining to see what she was pointing at. And then I saw it. A small, round table, noticeably lower than the others. It was decorated not with elegant floral centerpieces, but with a cluster of brightly colored balloons and paper placemats covered in cartoon animals. On the table were little buckets of crayons and juice boxes. It was the kids' table. My jaw went slack. The humiliation was so instant and so hot, it felt like a physical slap. My own sister, at her own wedding, had seated me, a 26-year-old woman, with the children. For a moment I just stood there, frozen, the sound of the string quartet fading into a dull roar in my ears. Clara was watching me, a flicker of smug triumph in her eyes. She expected me to cry or make a scene, but something else took over, a cold, quiet clarity. My gaze swept past the kids' table, past my snickering cousins, past my own parents who were refusing to look at me. My eyes landed on a table right near the front. It was the groom's family, his lovely parents, who had been nothing but kind to me, and his uncle, a man I'd only met once but knew was a powerful investor who had basically funded the groom's entire startup. There was one empty chair at their table. Without a second thought, I turned my back on my sister. I ignored her sputtering, "Alex, where are you going?" and walked with the purpose I hadn't felt all day. I reached their table, pulled out the empty chair, and sat down. The groom's mother looked at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. Then the uncle put down his wine-glass, leaned towards me with a calculating look, and in a low voice that cut through the noise, said, "I was wondering if you'd have the guts to do that." His name was Richard, Jason's uncle, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to see right through the whole charade. I swallowed hard, my adrenaline-fueled confidence wavering for a split second. I had to own this. "Well," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "when offered the choice between a juice box and a decent Pinot Noir, the decision makes itself." A slow smile spread across Richard's face. The groom's mother, Eleanor, let out a soft, nervous laugh, and the tension at the table broke. "I'm Eleanor," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "And this is my husband, George." "We are so glad you joined us, Alex." George nodded, looking relieved that a scene had been averted, at least for now. Richard leaned in slightly. "So tell me, Alex, is this a regular feature of your family gatherings? Assigning seating by perceived maturity level?" I could feel my sister's glare from across the room, a tangible heat on the back of my neck. I knew my parents were probably having a collective aneurysm, but sitting here, being treated like an adult, an equal, felt like breathing fresh air after being locked in a stuffy room my whole life. "Let's just say my sister and I have different definitions of art," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "She prefers the art of the grand gesture. I'm more of a minimalist." Richard chuckled, a deep appreciative sound. "I like that. Understated, efficient." He took a sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving mine. "Jason tells me you're a graphic designer. A very talented one, but you're freelancing. finding it hard to break in. My cheeks flushed. Of course, he knew. He'd probably run a background check on the entire bridal party. "It's a competitive field," I said simply, not wanting to air my failures at my sister's wedding reception. "It is," he agreed. "It's a field that rewards boldness, initiative, people who see an undesirable situation and find a better one." He gestured with his glass, indicating the table and me sitting at it. The implication was crystal clear. Just then, I saw the groom, Jason, making his way towards us. He had a pained expression on his face, and he was avoiding my gaze. He was being sent. A soldier dispatched by his queen. He stopped behind my chair, placing a hand on it. "Alex," he started, his voice a low, pleading whisper. She's really upset. It's her wedding day. Could you please just go sit where she asked you to?" The polite request was somehow more humiliating than the initial placement. He was asking me to willingly walk back to the corner of shame. The entire table went silent. Eleanor looked horrified. Before I could even form a response, Richard placed a firm, steadying hand on my forearm. "Jason," Richard said, his voice no longer quiet. It carried a weight that made my own brother-in-law flinch. "Leave her be. She's my guest at this table now." He then raised his voice just enough for the tables around us to hear clearly. In fact, we were just discussing a business opportunity. "My company is in desperate need of a lead designer with some actual nerve." He looked directly at me, a glint in his eye. "Alex, I'm prepared to offer you a position, a significant one. Consider it my wedding gift to your family, finally adding someone with a backbone to the payroll." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby guests. My heart stopped. Across the room I saw Clara's perfectly made-up face crumble. The mask of the blushing bride disintegrated, replaced by a contorted mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She hitched up her ridiculously expensive ivory dress and started storming towards our table, her bridesmaids scrambling in her wake. The look on her face wasn't just anger, it was the promise of all-out war. Clara descended on our table like a hurricane in tulle and lace. Jason, bless his spineless heart, practically dove out of her path. Her face was blotchy red beneath the perfect makeup, her eyes burning holes into me. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that carried more menace than a shout. Before I could answer, Richard stood up, a calm and immovable object meeting my sister's unstoppable force. He was a good foot taller than her, and his presence alone seemed to suck the air out of her sails. "Clara," he said, his tone polite but edged with steel. "I believe we were having a private conversation." "This is my wedding!" she shrieked, all pretense of composure gone. "And she is ruining it." She was told where to sit with the other children. The last two words were spat out with such vitriol that even the people at the next table winced. Eleanor stood up then, her face a mask of disappointment. "Clara, dear, that's quite enough. Alex is our guest at this table. Richard has just offered her a job. We should be celebrating?" Clara just stared at her, utterly dumbfounded. It was as if she couldn't comprehend a world where she wasn't the center of attention, where her desires weren't immediately catered to. Her eyes darted from Richard's unyielding expression to Eleanor's quiet disapproval, and then landed back on me. She saw me not cowering, not crying, but sitting straight, with the dawning realization that the power dynamic of our entire lives had just irrevocably shifted, and it broke her. "A job?" she screeched, the sound high and piercing. "You're offering her a job? To spite me? At my own wedding?" "On the contrary," Richard said smoothly, taking a deliberate sip of his wine. "I'm making a sound business decision. I reward talent and initiative. Your sister has displayed both in abundance tonight, something sorely lacking in your fiancé's last few quarterly reports, I might add." Jason went pale. The public jab was brutal and direct. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was a power play, and my sister had walked right into the middle of it. Clara's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. She was so used to getting her way through tantrums and theatrics that she had no defense against cold, hard logic and corporate leverage. Defeated, she finally turned her fury on the only target she thought she could still control: our parents. She stormed over to their table, and I watched the horribly familiar scene unfold. Her tearful, dramatic gestures. My mother wringing her hands, my father looking down at his plate, refusing to intervene. A few moments later, my father stood up. He walked over to our table with the weary resignation of a man who had long ago surrendered his will. He avoided my eyes, looking instead at the tablecloth. "Alex," he said, his voice heavy with shame. "Please, for your mother, for the family, just apologize to your sister and go sit where you were supposed to." The words were a gut punch. After everything, he was still siding with her, still asking me to be the smaller person, to swallow the humiliation for the sake of Clara's precious day. I looked from my father's downcast face to Richard, who was watching me intently, his expression unreadable. This was a test. It was one thing to sit at the table. It was another to hold my ground when my own family tried to drag me away. I took a deep breath, my voice clear and ringing with a finality that surprised even me. "No, Dad." "I don't think I will." My father flinched as if I'd struck him, but it was my mother's reaction that truly sealed the night. She rose from her chair, her face a storm cloud of fury, and marched directly towards me. She wasn't coming to plead. She wasn't coming to reason. She grabbed a half-full glass of red wine from a nearby waiter's tray, and with a look of pure, concentrated malice, she locked eyes with me and began to raise her arm. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the dark red liquid sloshing in the glass, a weapon aimed directly at me. I saw the grim satisfaction on my mother's face, the final act of putting her disappointing daughter in her place. I braced for the cold, staining splash of humiliation. But it never came. In a movement so swift I almost missed it, Richard stepped directly in front of me, shielding me with his body. The entire glass of red wine crashed against the back of his expensive, custom-tailored suit jacket. A dark, ugly stain spread across the light gray fabric. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. My mother froze, her hand still in the air, her mouth agape in utter shock. She had intended to shame me, but instead she had assaulted one of the most powerful men in the room, her new son-in-law's primary investor. Richard didn't even flinch. He slowly turned, his expression now completely unreadable, which was somehow more terrifying than anger. He looked at my mother, then at my father, and then his gaze swept over to Clara, who looked like she was about to faint. "Well," he said, his voice calm and dangerously low, "this has been illuminating." He shrugged off his stained jacket and draped it over the back of his chair. "Eleanor, George, I believe we've seen enough. Let's give the happy couple our best." With that, he, Eleanor, and George stood up from the table. The groom's parents looked at my family with undisguised disgust. Eleanor paused beside me and gently squeezed my shoulder. "The job offer is real, dear," she whispered. "Richard doesn't make idle threats or promises. Call his office on Monday." Then they simply walked out. The three most important guests, the groom's entire immediate family and financial backing, just left in the middle of the reception. Their departure was like pulling the keystone from an arch. The party just collapsed. The music faltered and then stopped. Guests started whispering, looking between my stunned family and the exit. Jason was frantically trying to talk to Clara, who was now sobbing hysterically, not out of hurt, but out of the sheer horror of her perfect day being so publicly and catastrophically ruined. My father finally looked at me, his face ashen. He opened his mouth to speak, but I just held up a hand. There was nothing left to say. I had spent my entire life trying to win their approval, shrinking myself to fit into the tiny, insignificant box they'd built for me. And for what? To be seated with toddlers and have wine thrown at me? I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I looked at the chaos I had in a way caused, at my sister's meltdown, my mother's horrified face, my father's utter defeat. And I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a profound and liberating sense of release. The ties that had bound me to their drama and their expectations had finally been severed. I walked away from the table, not towards the exit, but towards the now abandoned wedding cake. I picked up a small, clean plate, cut myself a generous slice of the 7-foot-tall monstrosity, and found an empty table in a quiet corner. As the drama continued to unfold across the room, I sat by myself, savoring the taste of sweet, delicious victory. It was the first time in my sister's presence that I had ever truly gotten to have my cake and eat it too. And come Monday, I had a new job to start, a new life. I had chosen a different table, and it turned out to be the head of my own,